Have you ever woken up feeling like you no longer recognize the life you built? Like the comforts that once held you now echo empty, and the roles you played don't quite fit your skin anymore. There's a quiet ache, a kind of mourning not for someone else, but for yourself. And buried beneath the confusion is something deeper. A flicker that won't die no matter how lost you feel. That flicker is the beginning, not the end. It doesn't look like a miracle. It looks like exhaustion, a heavy silence, a sudden aversion to small talk or plans that once lit you up. But this isn't you falling apart. It's you breaking open. What's slipping away was never truly yours. It was borrowed, learned, performed, and now something real is trying to emerge from underneath. The soul doesn't awaken in moments of ease. It awakens in the wreckage, when everything that once made sense begins to feel foreign. That's when it whispers, there's more. Not more to achieve, but more of you that you've never met. There's fear in this process, yes. The ego doesn't go quietly. It clings to the familiar, even when the familiar hurts. But the soul, the part of you that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be, knows this discomfort isn't punishment, it's invitation. If you've been wondering what's wrong with you, why nothing feels the same, why the world seems out of tune, know this, you're not broken, you're becoming. What begins as emotional unrest is often the soul shaking off the noise. It doesn't show up as clarity at first. It arrives as confusion, dissonance, even despair. The shadow you've avoided, the parts of yourself buried in shame, fear, or silence, begin to rise, not to destroy you, but to reintegrate you. You're not malfunctioning, you're being called back to wholeness. This isn't a clean process. There are days when your chest feels heavy for no reason, when joy feels out of reach, when you can't stand the sound of your own forced laughter. These aren't signs of weakness, they're signals. The mask you've worn for so long is crumbling, and the self behind it is waking up, stretching after years of being dormant. Sometimes it takes a heartbreak, a betrayal, or a loss to ignite this fire. But those moments don't create your awakening. They reveal it. What you feel isn't just pain, it's the sound of your own truth knocking on the door. You may begin to feel disconnected from things you used to love, even people you once called home. Not because you've grown cold, but because you're outgrowing the roles you once accepted to belong. And yes, it's lonely. But that loneliness isn't emptiness, it's space. Space being cleared for something more honest, more aligned. When the old identity dissolves, it's natural to feel lost. But what's really happening is this. The persona you created to be accepted is fading, and the self you buried is surfacing. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence, with stillness, with the disorienting feeling that you can't go back, and you're not yet sure where you're headed. People around you may not understand. They'll say you've changed. They'll miss the version of you who agreed, who smiled, who didn't make them uncomfortable. But you'll know in your bones that this change is not rebellion. It's resurrection. You're not becoming someone else. You're remembering who you were before the world interrupted. There's power in that, real grounded power, the kind that doesn't shout or seek attention. It lives quietly in the way you start choosing truth over comfort, in the way you walk away from what no longer feeds your spirit, in the way you stop apologizing for simply being who you are. The path inward isn't glamorous. It's not always peaceful. It's marked by silence, by confusion, by the ache of letting go. But that silence is sacred. It's not a void. It's a womb, a space where the self begins again. And in that space, the opinions of others start to lose their grip. You stop needing to be seen because you finally begin to see yourself. What once passed for strength, people-pleasing, performance, perfection, starts to feel like a cage. And you can no longer pretend. You can't fake enthusiasm. You can't smile when your spirit is screaming. Your nervous system rebels against the lies. That rebellion is sacred. It's your truth demanding breath. You may feel like you're unraveling, but what's unraveling isn't your life. It's the illusion. What remains is raw, unpolished, and real. The soul never wanted your perfection. It wanted your presence. And now it's calling you home. And when the grip tightens, when the ego clutches for control, it begins to tremble under the quiet defiance of the soul. It screams that you're falling apart, that something is wrong, that you're failing. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. This unraveling, though it feels chaotic, is sacred. It is the undoing of illusions, the collapse of roles and masks that never truly belong to you. The image you've spent your life perfecting begins to blur. You ask yourself questions that never had space before. Do I need admiration to feel worthy? Do I need applause to feel alive? These aren't signs of a crisis. They're signs of awakening. You begin to speak from the gut, not because it's easy, but because the weight of pretending has grown unbearable. You say no, not to rebel, but to honor your energy. You slowly withdraw from roles that once earned you love, the high achiever, the fixer, the peacekeeper. And in that quiet retreat, you begin to remember yourself. Grief shows up, sharp and real, but so does a strange sense of freedom. The ego's death feels raw, like stepping into the world without armor. But there's beauty in that nakedness. Jung didn't see vulnerability as weakness. He saw it as a rite of passage. To feel deeply is not regression, it is re-entry. You stop chasing validation and begin trusting the still voice within. No longer twisting yourself into someone else's mold, you tune into something purer. You may not yet know who you're becoming, but you feel the shift. The old has fallen away. And what is coming is not something you create, it's something you uncover. In this in-between space, you find yourself at the edge of mystery. It isn't a breakdown, it's sacred ground. If you resist the urge to rebuild too quickly, if you can simply stay present through the mess, you'll find yourself not shattered, but whole in a way you never were before. And then, the world around you begins to shift too. Things you once ignored start to shimmer with meaning. A number repeats itself. A book finds you. A phrase cuts through the noise and lands exactly where it's needed. These aren't coincidences. Jung called them synchronicities, moments that aren't bound by logic but by meaning. These events don't come with instructions, but they arrive with presence. They don't push, they reflect. They echo what's stirring inside you. The psyche and the world are not separate. They are threads of the same living tapestry. Synchronicity is that thread weaving your inner transformation into the outer world. When these moments begin to multiply, it's often a sign that something sacred is unfolding. Your soul is waking up, and the universe is responding like a mirror. And it's often during times of great inner turmoil that these signs appear. When the ego softens, the unconscious rises. Symbols begin to show themselves. Owls, butterflies, songs you haven't heard in years. These are not signs meant to command you. Jung warned against that. They're not orders but reflections. They don't tell you what to do. They remind you you're not alone. You're part of something vaster, older, wiser. The deeper you go, the more you begin to notice the world's what society told you would fulfill you no longer does. And in its place comes not certainty, but curiosity. Who am I beneath all this striving? What have I silenced in order to be accepted? These questions aren't distractions. They're the beginning of depth. And depth doesn't hunger for more things, it hungers for meaning. You begin seeking not noise, but silence, not entertainment, but truth. You find yourself drawn to ancient stories, to long walks, to sacred rituals you can't fully explain. A candle lit in the dark, a journal filled at midnight, the rustle of leaves beneath your feet. These aren't random, they are nourishment. Your conversations shift, small talk grates. You long for connection that lives beneath the surface. And when you begin to speak from that place, relationships change. Some will fall away, some will surprise you, but all will reflect the new voice rising within. This hunger for meaning isn't a phase, it's a return to what was always there before the world told you who to be. It doesn't demand a complete break from life, it invites a reorientation. Jung believed that the self seeks wholeness, not status. When the life you built no longer feels like home, it doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're finally coming home to yourself. And once you've tasted that depth, Nothing else will satisfy. You will move differently. You will choose differently. Because now you are not just reacting, you are listening. And what you are listening to is your soul, rising like dawn, quiet and unstoppable. At first, this rising doesn't shout. It arrives in dreams, not idle wanderings, but messages wrapped in symbol and emotion. Some shake you, some comfort you. You wake with images that won't leave. A face, a number, a phrase that echoes. You feel it means something, and it does. These dreams are not accidents. They are messages from the soul. Carl Jung called them sacred texts from the unconscious, delivered while the ego sleeps. When your outer life begins to fray, your inner life steps forward. Dreams become vivid, archetypes emerge. The wise old guide, the lost child, the dark pursuer. These are not just figments. They are messengers, here to help you remember who you are beneath the roles, beneath the noise, beneath the world's expectations. And so, as you rise, listen. Not just with your ears, but with your whole being. The truth is not loud. It is deep. It is symbolic. It lives in the silence between words, in the spaces dreams leave behind. Follow it, not blindly, but reverently. It knows the way home. They come in silence, not to scare you, but to speak truths too raw for daylight. Dreams, especially the ones that visit again and again. The same house, the same endless chase, the same symbolic end, aren't mistakes of the mind. They are messages wrapped in repetition, asking not to be solved, but to be felt. These visions don't come once and leave. They return, insistent. Not because you didn't listen, but because your soul isn't done speaking. These aren't punishments. They're invitations. A chase reveals what you run from. A fall whispers surrender. A death doesn't mean the end. It means the self you built is cracking open. Something deeper is trying to be born. Jung told us not to dismiss these dreams. He told us to record them, speak to them, listen. Because the dream is not trying to confuse you. It's trying to wake you. And when you stop treating your dreams as fiction and start honoring them as ritual, the veil between worlds begins to thin. Your outer life of routines and roles starts to shimmer with the light of inner meaning. What seemed like random fragments start pointing in the same direction. The voice you've ignored starts sounding familiar. You realize it was your soul, speaking fluently in the language of symbols, waiting for you to understand. There's a moment, subtle but irreversible, where fear no longer feels like a threat, but a threshold. You stand at the edge of what you've known. Behind you, comfort, approval, identity. Ahead, the unknown. The ego panics, it pleads to stay. But there's a quieter pull, a deeper calling that says, step forward. This isn't recklessness. This is holy courage. Every true awakening comes with loss. Not because you failed, but because you're shedding what can no longer contain you. The letting go hurts. Of course it does. The ego grieves every role it loses, every illusion it has to release. But the soul doesn't care for appearances. It cares for truth. Jobs shift. Relationships morph. Even your name, the way it sounds in your own mouth, begins to feel strange. You are not malfunctioning. You are transforming. What collapses on the outside is making space for what is rising within. Some people will drift away, not in betrayal, but because they no longer echo the person you're becoming. Dreams may dissolve, not from failure, but because they belong to someone you no longer are. The false self peels away, and though it clings with all its might, it must dissolve. Because the real self, buried beneath performance, is ready to emerge. Fear will still visit, but it will no longer hold the same power. Because now you recognize it. It's not the gatekeeper, it's the signpost. The ego is afraid of the unknown. The soul calls it home. If you find yourself grieving who you once were, let the tears fall. That version of you was necessary. They carried you through storms. They did their job, but now your soul is asking for something truer. Not a stronger mask, a deeper presence. You're not breaking down. You're breaking open. You're not falling apart. You're unfolding into someone more whole than you've ever been. This ache you're feeling, it's not an ending. It's the labor of becoming. to walk away from a script you didn't write, to say no to what's familiar, to hear the voice that's always whispered beneath the noise. That is the sacred act of reclaiming your life. That is what Jung meant by individuation, the becoming of the self. Not the self you invented to survive, the one that's been waiting, quietly, beneath every version of you. There comes a moment, quiet as breath, when something stirs inside. It's not loud, it doesn't announce itself, but you feel it. You're no longer trying to be seen, you're beginning to see, not with your eyes, but with something older, deeper, a presence not interested in your performance, but in your essence. Jung called it the self, the organizing center of your psyche. It doesn't seek applause, it just is. It's the flame that never went out, even when you lost your way. And when you start living from that center, everything changes. You stop chasing roles. You stop dressing in identities that no longer fit. You may have been the achiever, the peacemaker, the rebel, the caretaker. Those masks served you once, but they aren't you. The self needs no justification. It simply exists, steady and unshaken. When you live from that place, your choices shift. You stop asking, will they accept me? And start asking, is this true to me? Jung said when the ego steps aside, life becomes less about proving and more about being. You begin to walk away, not with anger, but with clarity. You say no, not from guilt, but from knowing. You say yes, not from strategy, but from alignment. You let go of the need to be understood, because now you understand yourself. That's not arrogance. That's wholeness. You begin to hold contradictions, joy and sorrow, loss and love, fear and courage. They all live in you, side by side. The self doesn't need perfection. It seeks integration. The ego no longer dominates. It becomes a companion. Uncertainty no longer feels like a threat. It feels sacred. Even your waiting feels like preparation. Even your pain begins to make sense. This is what Jung called the symbolic life, a way of seeing where nothing is random and everything carries meaning. And the most profound shift of all, you stop searching for the sacred in temples or teachings. You start feeling it inside. You cry at beauty without knowing why. You feel the divine in silence, in heartbreak, in stillness. Not because someone told you to, because you've touched something eternal. Jung called it the numinous, a brush with the divine that cannot be taught, only lived. To walk with the self is not to add more layers, but to peel them away, to remember who you were before the noise. And once you do, life stops being a chase. It becomes a flow. You stop trying to force your path. You begin to follow it. And that surrender is where you rise. So if this feels familiar, if you see yourself in these shifts, in this quiet transformation, take heart. You're not falling apart. You're falling inward. You're not lost. You're being led. The confusion is not chaos. It's the soul's way of preparing you. What feels like loss might be the clearing for something more honest, more you. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That's not a metaphor. That's the invitation. To go into the dark, to face yourself with fierce love, to walk through fire, not to destroy who you were, but to remember who you've always been. This isn't a straight line. It spirals. It returns. It burns and rebuilds. It breaks you open, and in doing so, makes space for the light. The person you thought you needed to be starts to dissolve, and from the ashes, something unshakable begins to rise. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It simply is. A quiet knowing, a deep strength, a truth that needs no mask. This is the awakening of the soul, and when it begins, everything changes. Not because the world has shifted, but because you have. If you're in the dark, keep walking. If the silence feels heavy, listen. If the ache feels unbearable, trust. Something sacred is emerging, and it does not need applause. It needs your presence, your surrender, your honesty. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are precisely where your soul needs you to be. Don't measure your path by who claps for you. Measure it by how peaceful you feel, how honest you can be, how courageously you let yourself be real. Because the true transformation was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that remembering, that return, is the quiet miracle of a soul finally rising.